When Carole Middleton arrived at Windsor Castle on that crisp autumn morning, she had no idea her visit would mark a turning point, one that would forever alter her relationship with the royal family. As the mother of Princess Catherine, Carole had always approached royal affairs with quiet deference, fully aware of her place in the intricate pecking order. But what unfolded that day would stir something deep within her: fierce, unshakable instinct. The protective fire of a grandmother determined to defend her granddaughter at any cost. The invitation had come unexpectedly. Queen Camilla had extended a personal request for Carole to attend a small, private family gathering in honor of Princess Charlotte's recent academic achievements at Lamerick School. It was described as an intimate celebration, just close relatives coming together to recognize the young princess's hard work and dedication. Carole had been genuinely touched. The gesture seemed to signal that the bonds between the Middleton and Windsor families were stronger than ever. But as she would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. Not every family gathering is what it seems, and sometimes the most unsettling revelations come when we feel most at ease, surrounded by those who are meant to care for and protect us. The day had begun like something out of a storybook. Carole arrived shortly after 11 a.m., greeted by the stately grandeur of Windsor Castle, the towering stone walls, the immaculate gardens, the quiet sense of history in the air. She had visited many times before, yet the majesty of the place never failed to move her. Most of all, she was eager to see Charlotte Bright, curious Charlotte who had been thriving at school and deserved every bit of the recognition she was receiving. Catherine and William had arrived earlier with their 3 children in tow. George, full of restless energy, was already darting around the grounds as though he knew every secret corridor by heart. Little Louis, more subdued, but no less excited, clutched a toy airplane he couldn't wait to show his great-grandmother. And Charlotte, sweet, brilliant Charlotte, radiated pride as she talked about her latest achievements. The gathering was deliberately informal, at Camilla's suggestion. Rather than a grand stateroom, they were to meet in the smaller oak room, warm, wood-paneled, and more conducive to family conversation. Afternoon tea was planned, complete with Charlotte's favorites, delicate cucumber sandwiches, and freshly baked scones from the castle's kitchens. At first, everything felt just right. Carole spent the early part of the day chatting with Catherine and William, catching up on the children's latest adventures. Charlotte had recently earned top marks for a school project on medieval castles, a particularly fitting topic, considering their surroundings. But the sense of comfort would not last. It's because underneath the polished surface of the royal celebration, something was brewing, something that would demand Carole's full attention and strength. And soon, she would be forced to choose: stand back as always, or step forward when it mattered most. Charlotte had also recently been selected for her school's advanced reading program, a distinction that filled Carole with quiet, overwhelming pride. Her granddaughter wasn't just bright. She was brilliant, with an insatiable curiosity that reminded Carole so much of Catherine at the same age. Watching Charlotte speak animatedly, her eyes sparkling with excitement, Carole could almost see her daughter as a child again, innocent, full of promise. The first warning signs it was during the pre-lunch mingling that Carole first sensed something wasn't quite right. Charlotte had been cheerfully recounting a story about her school history project to a small circle of family members, her words tumbling out in an enthusiastic stream. Then Camilla approached as if on cue. The light in Charlotte's face dimmed. Her radiant smile softened into something more guarded. It was subtle, barely perceptible to the casual observer, but Carole saw it instantly. She'd spent her life understanding people, reading micro-expressions, noting the shifts that came before a child said what they really felt. And this was a shift. "Hello, Charlotte, dear," Camilla said with a practiced smile. "Do hope you're not getting too excited. I wouldn't want you to wear yourself out before lunch." The words were mild on the surface, even kind. But something about the delivery was off. A faintly clipped tone, too sweet, too calculated. Carole noticed Charlotte's shoulders stiffen, the sparkle in her eyes faded. "I'm fine, Granny," Camilla. Charlotte replied politely, her voice noticeably softer than it had been seconds. "Earlier, of course you are, dear," Just remember to use your inside voice. This is a very old castle, with very old walls," Camilla added with a light laugh. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a harmless comment. But Carole saw beneath the surface. There was a subtle condescension in Camilla's tone, an undercurrent of correction disguised as affection. Charlotte's response was automatic. She nodded, stepping closer to her mother, her confidence slowly retreating inward. It was so expertly done, so gentle, so quiet that most people wouldn't have noticed anything at all. But Carole noticed. She always noticed. Her instincts, honed from years of working with children and navigating complex social spaces, were tingling. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just a one-off remark. This was the beginning of a pattern. The lunch incident, lunch, was served in the castle's smaller dining room, an elegant space with tall arched windows, overlooking the late summer gardens. The table gleamed with polished silverware and bone china, royal luncheon name, but its purpose was simple, to celebrate a child's hard work. Charlotte had been seated between her grandfather Charles and her great-aunt, Anne. Always been warm and encouraging presences in her life. The conversation flowed easily at first. Charles was especially animated, recounting recent travels and asking the children about school and hobbies. Charlotte, now slightly recovered, lit up under his attention. She spoke confidently, recounting her school projects and sharing historical facts with the kind of passion only a young scholar possesses. "And did you know, Grandpa," she said proudly, "that Windsor Castle has been home to 39 monarchs?" Charles chuckled, clearly delighted. "Is that so? What a remarkable thing to remember. I.e., you must share your whole project with MIT. Sounds absolutely fascinating." Charlotte beamed. But Carole, ever watchful, noticed something else. Camilla's smile tightening ever so slightly at the corner. Her eyes didn't match the curve of her lips. Queen Consort was still smiling, but it was the kind of smile that warned of incoming weather. Then, Charlotte paused to take a breath. Camilla stepped in. "That's quite enough history. Lessons for now, don't you think?" she said lightly. "Perhaps we should let the grown-ups have a turn to speak." The words were delivered with a practiced gentleness, but their effect was brutal. Charlotte's expression faltered, as if she'd been scolded in front of the class. Her cheeks flushed. She immediately quieted, folding her hands in her lap, and lowered her eyes to her untouched plate. The sparkle was gone again. Charles looked momentarily confused. Glancing between Charlotte and Camilla, a beat passed. No one said anything. But Carole saw everything. It was happening again. And this time, she wasn't going to sit quietly and pretend it was nothing. Glancing between his wife and his granddaughter, Charles's brow furrowed with concern. He seemed momentarily unsure of what had just passed, whether they'd missed something or whether the sudden chill at the table was real. Across the polished oak dining table, Catherine and William exchanged a knowing look. It was brief, but unmistakable. Still neither spoke. The silence stretched just a beat too long, or an awkward pause in the middle of what had been a joyful lunch. It was Princess Anne who broke the tension. "George," she said with easy cheer, "how's your football training coming along? Scored any goals lately?" Grateful for the redirection, the boy immediately launched into a vivid recount of his last match. And the moment passed for everyone except Carole, because Carole had seen enough. This wasn't a case of harmless teasing or a generational misunderstanding. It was deliberate. It was cutting. It was far from the first time. Her instincts, those finely honed, fiercely protective instincts that had helped her raise 3 children and build a business empire, were now fully engaged. This wasn't going to be ignored or excused away. Not anymore. The breaking point. After lunch, the family moved to the garden terrace for coffee and afternoon tea. The October air was crisp, but pleasant. Golden light spilling over the historic stone of Windsor Castle. The children were given permission to explore the gardens, under the watchful eyes of their protection officers. And Charlotte, now outdoors and free, seemed to recover some of her spirit. She ran across the lawn with George and Louis, laughing, twirling, full of life again. Carole stood beside Catherine, sipping tea and discussing upcoming family plans when she noticed Charlotte approaching the terrace alone. In her hands she carried a small bouquet of late-blooming roses and wildflowers, clearly picked with pride. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, her eyes alight. "Look what I found," Charlotte called, her voice full of excitement as she climbed the stone steps. "There are still roses blooming by the south wall." "How lovely, darling," Catherine replied with warmth. "Why don't you show everyone?" Charlotte beamed. Holding the flowers gently in her small hands, she took a few more steps toward the seated adults. Then Camilla's voice sliced through the peaceful afternoon like a blade. "Charlotte, stop right there." The sharpness of it startled everyone, including Charlotte, who froze in place. "Just look at the state of you," Camilla continued, her tone icy. "You're covered in dirt and your dress is torn. What will people think?" All eyes turned to the little girl. Carole's heart ached at the sight. Charlotte had a faint grass stain on her dress, bit of mud on her shoes, but she looked exactly like what she was, a child who had been happily playing in a garden. More importantly, they were at a private family gathering. There were no cameras, no press, no one to impress but one another. "I'm sorry, Granny." Camilla. "Ah!" Charlotte murmured, her smile crumbling, her excitement visibly draining. "I'm sure you were just thinking about yourself." Camilla went on, her voice still carrying. "Instead of considering how your appearance reflects on the family, a proper young lady doesn't run about like a wild thing, getting filthy and tearing her clothes. Perhaps you should go inside and let your nanny tidy you up before you embarrass us further." The words hit Carole like a punch. She saw her granddaughter's face fall. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. And then, as if in slow motion, the little girl's fingers loosened. The bouquet tumbled to the terrace stones, petals scattering like confetti in morning. That was it. The moment the line. Carole stood. She rose with the quiet, commanding composure of a woman who knew exactly how much power she held, and precisely when to use it. She walked to Charlotte without hesitation, knelt down despite the soft cream of her cashmere coat, and gently gathered the fallen flowers with her granddaughter. "These are beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm but clear enough for every adult on the terrace to hear. "You have such a gift for finding beautiful things." She brushed a few leaves off Charlotte's dress and placed a loving arm around her shoulders. "And you," she added firmly, "look perfect. Just like a little girl, joyful, curious, and full of life. A child is all about." Only then did Carole turn to face Camilla. Straight-backed, calm, and utterly unflinching. The air around the table seemed to still. I think there's been a misunderstanding," Carole said, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Charlotte has done nothing wrong. She's been behaving exactly as any happy, healthy child should behave at a family gathering." Camilla's eyebrows arched in surprise. "Sorry, but I don't think you understand the standards I understand perfectly." Carole interrupted, her voice cutting cleanly across the terrace. It was the first time she'd ever interrupted a member of the royal family, and she did so without hesitation. "I understand," she continued, "that you've spent the better part of this afternoon criticizing and belittling my granddaughter for the crime of being an enthusiastic, intelligent little girl, and I'm here to tell you that it stops now." The terrace fell into an unnatural silence. Even the birds seemed to pause their afternoon song. Catherine and William sat frozen, wide-eyed. They'd never seen Carole always so gracious, so measured like this. But in this moment, she wasn't playing the role of guest or even mother-in-law. She was a grandmother. She had drawn the line. Camilla began again, her voice hardening, that familiar aristocratic edge creeping in. "I think you're overreacting, no," Carole said. The word rang out like a bell. "I'm not overreacting, responding appropriately to someone systematically trying to crush a child's spirit. Charlotte is 8 years old. She's bright. She's curious. She's kind, and she's well-behaved. She's also my granddaughter, and I will not stand by while anyone makes her feel ashamed for simply being herself." Charles, visibly distressed, had risen from his chair and was approaching slowly, clearly hoping to de-escalate. But Carole wasn't finished. Spent my adult life helping build up children's confidence, not tearing it down. I've watched Charlotte thrive under the love and encouragement of her parents, her teachers, her family. She's a remarkable little girl with a brilliant future ahead of her, and she deserves to be celebrated, not constantly corrected and criticized. Camilla's face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. Her mouth tightened, but no defense came easily. I was simply trying to teach her proper behavior, she said, more subdued now, to help her understand how she reflects on the family by telling her she's embarrassing you. Carole shot back. By shaming her for a grass stain and a joyful heart. That's not teaching, Camilla. It's emotional manipulation, and it has no place in any family, royal or otherwise. The weight of those words lingered in the air like smoke. What followed might have been the most uncomfortable silence in Windsor Castle's long-storied history. Carole stood firm, one arm still wrapped protectively around Charlotte's small shoulders. Camilla remained seated, staring out toward the gardens, lips pressed in a thin line, Mabel Lore unwilling to meet Carole's gaze. Charles looked between them helplessly, torn between his wife and the uncomfortable truth he could no longer ignore. This wasn't an isolated incident. It had happened before, and it would happen again unless someone stopped it. Catherine and William still hadn't moved, but their expressions spoke volumes. They weren't just witnessing a confrontation, they were witnessing a reckoning. One they perhaps should have initiated themselves, and they knew it then. Softly, Charlotte looked up at her grandmother. Her eyes were wide, glassy, but calm now, and filled with something unmistakable. Gratitude. Relief. Thank you, Grandmama, she whispered. Those 4 quiet words shifted the entire atmosphere. A spell broken, Catherine stood immediately, walking to her daughter's side. She placed a gentle hand on Charlotte's back and looked at her mother with quiet, fierce appreciation. William rose a beat later, crossing to them and placing a steadying arm around his wife's shoulders. His face was unreadable, but his body said everything. We stand with her. The royal hierarchy was unchanged. The titles, the rules, the protocols, they would all endure. But in that moment, Carole Middleton, come dignified, resolute, had done something that not even the crown could ignore. She had protected the heart of the next generation, I think. Catherine began quietly, her voice low but steady. It might be best if we called it a day. Charles gave a slow, solemn nod, his usual diplomatic composure showing visible cracks. Yes, perhaps that would be wise. All seemed to need some time to a process. Camilla looked around the terrace. At Charlotte, tear-streaked, but safe in her mother's embrace. At Carole, still standing tall, unwavering in her quiet defiance. At William and Catherine, united, unblinking. And at Charles, whose discomfort had become impossible to mask. For perhaps the first time in years, Camilla found herself at a genuine loss for words. No defense came, no retort, no parting remark. Just silence. The drive home, the ride back to the Middleton home, was quiet at first. Charlotte sat in the back seat between her parents, her small hands resting on her lap. Her expression no longer tearful but thoughtful. Carole drove, her knuckles slightly white on the steering wheel. Her mind reeled with everything that had happened. She had never imagined she'd one day find herself confronting the queen consort, certainly not in defense of her granddaughter. But as she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Charlotte's more relaxed expression, shoulders no longer tense, face calmer, she knew she had done the right thing. Then, softly, "Grandmama?" Charlotte's voice broke the silence. "Yes, sweetheart. Was I really being bad today?" Carole's heart ached at the question. She immediately pulled the car to the side of the quiet country lane, shifted into park, and turned to face her granddaughter. "Charlotte," she said gently but firmly, "listen to me very carefully. You are not being bad. We're being exactly what you should. Be curious, enthusiastic, kind, and intelligent. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of those wonderful parts of who you are." From the back seat, Catherine reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Grandmama is absolutely right," she said. "You were perfect today, just as you always are, but," Granny Camilla said. "She was wrong," William interrupted, his voice clear and calm. "Granny, Camilla was wrong, darling. And that's not something we say lightly about any adult. But even grown-ups make mistakes. What she said to you today was a mistake, and it won't happen again. Charlotte nodded slowly, eyes down for a moment. As she absorbed this, Carole could see the wheels turning in her granddaughter's mind, processing not just the words, but the truth beneath them. Children are resilient, yes, but they're also profoundly perceptive. And Charlotte, bright as she was, had understood perfectly well that something had been off that day. Now, she was also learning the most important part, that she was not alone. Immediate consequences that evening, in the privacy of their own home, Catherine and William made a quiet but firm decision. Charlotte would no longer attend private family gatherings with Camilla, unless accompanied by one of her parents. That boundary would remain in place until trust could be reestablished if it ever could. They also agreed on something else. Next time, they would speak up immediately. No more staying silent out of respect for hierarchy, not when their child was involved. The very next morning, the phone rang. Charles? He spoke to Carole personally. The conversation was stiff at first measured. Diplomatic, but he didn't avoid the core of the issue. Carole, he said, voice heavy with the weight of the crown he had spent a lifetime preparing for. I want you to know that I deeply value your family's place in our lives. There was a pause. Charlotte is precious to all of us. She should never be made to feel otherwise. Yesterday was poorly handled, that much is clear. And I give you my word, we will take steps to ensure it never happens again. It wasn't a sweeping apology, but it was something, and it came from a man who had clearly seen, perhaps for the first time, that silence could be as damaging as the words themselves. As for Camilla, she never called. No apology, no note, not even a word through palisades. But the message had been received. Loud and clear, whether it was pride, embarrassment, or an unwillingness to acknowledge wrongdoing, Carole never knew. But Camilla's silence in the days and weeks that followed spoke volumes. No phone call, no message, no apology, just a void, where accountability should have been. And yet, things changed. In the months that followed, subtle but significant shifts began to appear in how royal family gatherings were structured. Charlotte was never again left alone with Camilla. When they were in the same room, there was always a buffer, other family members staying close, making sure the young princess was never made to feel small again. More importantly, Charlotte herself began to change. The quiet tension, carefulness she'd started to carry in royal settings, the hesitancy to speak up or express joy, began to melt away. The anxiety which had once been so subtle her family hadn't even noticed it building was now slowly, surely replaced by light. She returned to being the confident, curious, bright little girl she had always been at home and in the classroom. And Carole Middleton became more than just a beloved grandmother, she became a cornerstone. Charlotte, even at her young age, understood what had happened. She knew her grandmother had spoken up for her when she hadn't been able to speak for herself. The bond between them deepened. It was no longer just about love. It was about trust, safety, and respect. Outside the family, quiet whispers passed through certain circles. Word spread not the details, but the essence. That Carole Middleton had stood up to the queen consort in defense of her granddaughter. That she hadn't backed down, hadn't softened her message to preserve appearances, and instead of damaging her reputation, the story unconfirmed, outspoken, unspoken publicly, only enhanced it. She was seen not just as a matriarch or a successful businesswoman. Even when doing so came with great personal cost. The broader message, what happened that October afternoon at Windsor Castle, wasn't just about one child or one grandmother. It was a reminder that adults, regardless of their rank, title, or status, carry an essential responsibility to protect, nurture, and uplift the children in their care, and that responsibility must always outweigh protocol hierarchy or fear of awkwardness. Carole Middleton's quiet courage sent a message that resonated far beyond the walls of any royal estate. No child, any child, should be made to feel ashamed for their natural joy, curiosity, or brilliance. especially not one living under the unique pressures and expectations of public life. Yes, Charlotte lives a life of immense privilege. But she also faces scrutiny that no 8-year-old should be expected to bear. She doesn't just need love, she needs adults around her who are willing to stand up and say, "This is not acceptable. Not here, not now, not ever." And in Carole she found exactly that. Looking forward today, Princess Charlotte continues to thrive. She excels in school, she's full of personality, she runs and laughs and debates facts about castles and history. With anyone willing to listen, she is joyful, bright, and unafraid to speak her mind. What happened at Windsor has quietly become part of the family's private story, not a wound, but a milestone. A moment that reminded everyone involved just how fiercely this little girl is loved. Carole Middleton has never spoken publicly about that day, and she likely never will. She doesn't need to. Those who know her understand one thing with certainty. She would do it again, without hesitation, without apology, because for her, the role of grandmother isn't ceremonial, it's sacred. And protecting her grandchildren's happiness and self-worth will always matter more than titles, traditions, or appearances. The relationship between Camilla and the Middleton family remains polite but distant. The warmth that once existed has been replaced with something cooler, more measured. Some bridges once burned can be rebuilt but never quite to their original strength. And maybe that's okay, because everyone, including the future queen, learned something that day. Boundaries matter, kindness matters, and silence in the face of harm, no matter how subtle, is never the answer. A question for us also. Now we turn the question to you. What would you have done in Carole Middleton's position? Was she right to confront the queen consort so directly? Should she have handled it differently? And more broadly, how should families balance respect for hierarchy with the moral obligation to protect a child's emotional well-being? We love to hear your thoughts. Here in the comments below. This was more than a moment of grandmotherly courage. It was a lesson in values and a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, is always worth it.